The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty expanse of Sawyer Briggs' ranch, painting the weathered fence posts and sparse grassland in shades of amber and rust. He stood on the porch of his modest cabin, one hand shading his eyes as he squinted down the rutted trail that served as the only connection between his isolated homestead and the town of Cedar Ridge, some 15 miles east. Today was the day. After months of correspondence, his mail-order bride would arrive on the weekly stagecoach. Sawyer ran a calloused hand through his dark hair, still damp from his attempt to tame it with water and pomade. He'd put on his best shirt, the blue cotton one with only 2 patches, and had even trimmed his beard that morning, though the result in his shaving mirror had done little to ease his nerves. At 32, Sawyer had built this ranch from nothing but determination and back-breaking labor. 5 years of wrestling cattle, mending fences, and sleeping under stars had given him calluses thick as leather and a deep understanding of the land's harsh rhythms. What it hadn't given him was companionship. The nearest neighbor lived 8 miles away, and trips to town were reserved for necessities. The advertisement in the Matrimonial Times had seemed like a practical solution. He'd been specific in his letter he needed a sturdy woman who understood hard work, someone who could manage a household while he tended the ranch. He'd been honest about the isolation, the simple accommodations, the long days. The woman who'd responded, Miss Iris Quaid from Ohio, had seemed perfect on paper. Her letters spoke of growing up on a small farm, of knowing how to preserve food, tend a garden, and mend clothing. She'd even mentioned she could handle a rifle if needed. A dust cloud appeared on the horizon, growing larger as the stagecoach approached. Sawyer's stomach tightened. He smoothed down his shirt once more and descended the porch steps, positioning himself where she'd see him immediately, tall, broad-shouldered, perhaps a bit weathered but respectable enough. He hoped. The stagecoach rolled to a stop in a cloud of dust and creaking leather. The driver, old Pete Hutchins, gave Sawyer a knowing grin. "Got yourself a special delivery today. Briggs," he called down, already climbing from his perch to retrieve luggage. The coach door opened, and Sawyer's carefully rehearsed greeting died on his lips. The woman who emerged was nothing like what he'd imagined, where he'd expected homespun cotton and practical boots. She wore a traveling dress of deep burgundy wool, its buttons gleaming like tiny mirrors in the afternoon light. Her hair, instead of being pulled back in a simple bun, was arranged in an elaborate style beneath a hat adorned with ribbon and a small feather. She moved with a grace that spoke of dancing lessons and tea parties, not of milking cows and hauling water. She was beautiful, heartbreakingly, impossibly beautiful. Her skin was porcelain pale, unmarked by sun or wind. Her eyes, when they found his, were the color of spring violets, framed by lashes that needed no cosmetic enhancement. Everything about her screamed refinement, education, and a world so far removed from his own that Sawyer felt suddenly, painfully aware of every patch on his shirt, every callus on his hands. "Mr. Briggs." Her voice, when she spoke, carried a cultured accent that confirmed his worst fears. This was no farm girl from Ohio. Sawyer found his voice with difficulty. "Yes, ma'am, that's me." He cleared his throat, acutely aware of his own rough drawl. "You must be Miss Quaid." A flicker of something relief-fear crossed her features before she smiled. The expression transformed her face, but Sawyer noticed it didn't quite reach her eyes. There was a weariness there, a tension that seemed at odds with her polished appearance. "Yes," she said, descending from the coach with Pete's assistance. "I am Iris Quaid." Pete was unloading trunks, multiple trunks from the coach, far more luggage than a practical farm woman would need. Sawyer's confusion deepened. Had there been some mistake? Had the agency sent the wrong woman? Forgive me, Miss Quaid. Sawyer began carefully. But I want to be certain there's no misunderstanding. You received my letters. You know about the ranch. The conditions here. She reached into her small traveling bag and withdrew a bundle of letters. his letters. He recognized with a start. Every word, Mr. Briggs, I know precisely where I am and why I'm here. Her fingers tightened on the papers for a moment, and again he caught that flash of something desperate in her eyes. The stagecoach was already preparing to leave. Pete climbed back to his seat, tipping his hat. I'll be back through in a week. Briggs, miss. With a crack of his whip, the coach rolled away, leaving them standing in the settling dust. Sawyer looked at the pile of trunks, then at the woman who was supposed to become his wife. Everything about this felt wrong, yet her eyes held a plea he couldn't ignore. Whatever had brought her here, it wasn't the simple desire for frontier life he'd expected. The ranch is just there, he said finally, gesturing to the collection of buildings, the cabin, the barn, the chicken coop he'd built with such pride. They looked shabby now, seen through what he imagined were her eyes. It's not much, but it's solid. Built it all myself. It's perfect, she said quickly, too quickly. Then, more softly, it's exactly what I was hoping for. Sawyer hefted one of her trunks, surprised by its weight. We'd best get you settled before dark. Gets cold quickly once the sun sets. He paused, searching for something else to say. There's your room off the main cabin. I've tried to make it comfortable. As they walked toward the cabin, Iris Quade's gaze swept over the landscape, not with the dismay he'd expected, but with an odd intensity, as if she were memorizing every hill, every distant mesa. When she stumbled slightly on the uneven ground, he moved instinctively to steady her, but she recovered quickly, lifting her chin with a pride that seemed both admirable and somehow tragic. You're not what I expected, Sawyer said honestly as they reached the porch. She turned to him then, and for the first time, her smile seemed genuine. No, Mr. Briggs, I don't imagine I am, but then... She glanced back at the horizon where the stagecoach had disappeared, and that haunted look returned. Perhaps neither of us is quite what we seem. The words hung in the air between them as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Sawyer had the sudden, unsettling feeling that his carefully ordered life, his routine of dawn risings and simple meals, of cattle and seasons and solitude was about to change in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. He'd wanted a wife, a helpmeet, someone to share the burden of frontier life. Instead, he'd gotten a mystery wrapped in burgundy wool and violet eyes. As he held the cabin door open for her, watching the way she gathered her skirts to step over the threshold, Sawyer wondered if he'd ever truly know the real reason Iris Quade had traveled 1,000 miles to marry a stranger in the middle of nowhere. The last rays of sunlight slanted through the windows as he set down her trunk. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. It was going to be a long night, and Sawyer had the feeling it was only the beginning of something far more complicated than he'd bargained for. The first week passed in an awkward dance of politeness and distance. Sawyer had shown Iris to her room, a small but clean space he'd whitewashed himself, furnished with a simple bed, washstand, and the rocking chair that had belonged to his mother. She'd thanked him graciously, but he'd seen the way her eyes lingered on the narrow window, as if calculating whether she could fit through it if needed. Each morning, Sawyer rose before dawn to tend the livestock, often finding Iris already awake, standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, her gaze fixed on the eastern horizon. She'd taken over the household duties without complaint, though her first attempts at cooking over the wood stove had resulted in scorched beans and bread hard enough to drive nails. She'd laughed at her failures, a brittle sound that didn't match the worry in her eyes. You don't have to watch the road constantly, Sawyer said one morning, joining her at the window. Stage doesn't come but once a week. Her fingers tightened on the coffee cup. I enjoy watching the sunrise, she said, but her voice carried a false lightness that had become familiar. Despite her obvious unfamiliarity with frontier life, Iris threw herself into learning with a determination that surprised him. Her soft hands blistered from hauling water and scrubbing laundry, but she never complained. When he offered to teach her to shoot, she accepted eagerly, though her first attempts with his old Henry rifle left her shoulder bruised from the recoil. "Why do you need to know this?" he asked after she'd fired her 20th round, finally hitting the tin can he'd set on a fence post. "A woman should know how to protect herself," she replied, reloading with increasing confidence. "Especially out here." It was the way she said it, not as a general observation, but as someone who had specific dangers in mind that made Sawyer study her more closely. Everything about Iris Quaid was a contradiction. She moved with the bearing of a woman accustomed to servants, yet worked until exhaustion claimed her. She spoke with educated precision, but was teaching herself the rough skills of survival with grim determination. On the 8th day, Sawyer was repairing a section of fence when he spotted the dust cloud. 3 riders, moving fast from the northeast. His hand went instinctively to the colt at his hip as he watched them approach. They weren't locals, their horses were too fine, their tack too fancy for working cowboys. He was walking back toward the cabin when Iris emerged, shading her eyes to peer at the approaching riders. The color drained from her face so quickly Sawyer thought she might faint. "Get inside," he said quietly. "No." She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in with surprising strength. "If they found me, hiding won't help." Her violet eyes met his, desperate and determined. "Whatever they say, please believe that I never meant to involve you in this." The riders pulled up in the yard, their horses lathered with sweat. The man in the lead dismounted with practiced ease, tall, well-dressed in a black suit more suited to a city boardroom than the frontier. His companions remained mounted, hands resting casually near their weapons. "Victoria," the leader said, his voice carrying the same cultured tones as Iris's. "Your father has been beside himself with worry." Sawyer felt Iris Victoria stiffen beside him. "Mr. Thornton," she said, lifting her chin. "As you can see, I'm perfectly well." Thornton's gaze swept dismissively over Sawyer before returning to her. "This charade has gone on long enough. You've had your rebellion, made your point. Now it's time to come home and honor your obligations." "My obligations?" Her voice rose, cracking with emotion. "You mean my sale to the highest bidder? Your engagement to Harrison Hartford is hardly—" "It's exactly that," she interrupted. "A business transaction between my father and his. I'm merely the commodity being exchanged." Sawyer stepped forward, positioning himself partially in front of her. "The lady seems to have made her choice clear. I'll ask you to respect it." Thornton's eyes narrowed as he truly looked at Sawyer for the first time. "And you are?" "Sawyer Briggs. This is my land you're on." "Ah, yes. The cowboy she's deceived into sheltering her." Thornton's smile was cold. "Tell me, Mr. Briggs, did she mention she's Victoria Pemberton, daughter of Charles Pemberton of the Pemberton banking fortune, or that she fled 2 days before her wedding, taking with her a necklace worth more than your little ranch could earn in a lifetime?" Sawyer felt the ground shift beneath his feet, but he kept his voice steady. "Don't see any necklace. Don't much care about her name either. She came here of her own will." "She's a thief." One of the mounted men spoke up. "That necklace belongs to the Hartford family, a wedding gift that was to be presented at the ceremony." "It was my mother's," Victoria's voice rang out across the yard. "Given to her by my grandmother. Father had no right to promise it to them, no right to use it as part of his devil's bargain." "The law says otherwise," Thornton replied smoothly. "Your father has filed charges. Theft, breach of contract, quite the list. You can return with us voluntarily, or we can wait for the federal marshals to collect you. Your choice." Sawyer felt Victoria trembling beside him, but her voice remained strong. "Then I choose to wait for the marshals. At least they'll be bound by law, not by my father's money." Thornton's face darkened. "You stupid girl. Do you think this cowboy can protect you? Do you think he'll still want you when he learns the full truth? You're promised to another man, legally bound. Everything you've done here is a lie." "That's enough." Sawyer's hand moved to rest on his gun. "You've delivered your message. Now get off my land." The two mounted men shifted, hands moving toward their weapons, but Thornton raised a hand to stop them. "We'll be back, Mr. Briggs. With proper authority, I hope you consider carefully whether harboring a fugitive is worth losing everything you've built here." He remounted his horse with sharp, angry movements. "Victoria, your father is prepared to forgive this indiscretion, provided you return immediately with the necklace." In response, Victoria reached into the collar of her dress and pulled out a chain. Even in the harsh sunlight, the necklace sparkled diamonds and sapphires in an intricate setting that spoke of old money and older traditions. For a moment, she held it up, letting it catch the light. Then, with a sudden movement, she flung it as hard as she could into the brush beyond the yard. It disappeared into the tangle of sagebrush and mesquite, swallowed by the unforgiving landscape. "No!" Thornton spurred his horse forward, but the thick brush formed an impenetrable barrier. "Tell my father he can search every inch of this desert if he wants," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Tell him I'd rather see it lost forever than let him sell my mother's memory along with her daughter." Thornton wheeled his horse around, his face twisted with fury. "You've made a grave mistake, both of you. This isn't over." He jabbed a finger at Sawyer. "When we return, you'll be charged with harboring a criminal. Think about that while you're playing house with your stolen bride." They rode off in a cloud of dust and anger, leaving Sawyer and Victoria standing in the sudden silence. She was shaking now, the brave facade crumbling as the sound of hoofbeats faded. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I never meant—" "Is it true?" Sawyer asked quietly. "Are you Victoria Pemberton?" She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "Everything else I told you was a lie. My name, my background, all of it. I answered your advertisement because I was desperate. I thought if I could disappear, become someone else, marry quickly." She laughed bitterly. "I was naive to think they wouldn't find me." Sawyer removed his hat, running a hand through his hair as he processed this information. The woman he'd been sharing his home with, teaching to shoot, watching struggle with simple tasks, she was an heiress, a runaway bride, a thief, according to some. "The necklace," he said finally. "Was it really yours?" "My mother died when I was 12, Victoria said, her voice soft. "That necklace was all I had left of her. Father kept it locked away, said it would be part of my dowry, when I learned he'd promised it to the Hartfords as surety for the engagement." She shuddered. "I took it the night I ran. If that makes me a thief, so be it." They stood there as the afternoon sun beat down. Two people from different worlds brought together by desperation and chance. Sawyer thought of the federal marshals who would surely come, of the powerful men who would use the law as a weapon. He thought of his simple plans for a simple life with a simple wife. Nothing about Victoria Pemberton was simple. "You'd better show me where you threw it," he said finally. "If we're going to fight this, we'll need all the ammunition we can get." She looked up at him, hope flickering in her tear-stained eyes. "You're not sending me away?" Sawyer shook his head slowly. "Said I'd take you as my wife. Don't recall putting any conditions on that about your name or your past. But from now on, no more lies. If we're going to face what's coming, we do it together, with truth between us." Victoria nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so unladylike, so human, that it made Sawyer's heart twist, whatever else she was. She was brave, and she was his, if only by the strange circumstances that had brought her to his door. As they walked toward the brush where the necklace had vanished, Sawyer couldn't shake Thornton's parting words. Playing house with a stolen bride? Perhaps that's what they were doing. But as Victoria slipped her hand into his seeking comfort or offering it, he wasn't sure Sawyer knew he'd defend her right to choose her own path, whatever the cost. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the landscape in shades of gold and shadow. Somewhere in that wilderness lay a fortune in jewels, But Sawyer was beginning to understand that what Victoria had really thrown away was her past, and what she'd chosen instead was the uncertain promise of freedom, even if it came with a price neither of them could yet calculate. They searched until darkness fell, combing through the dense brush where Victoria had thrown the necklace. The mesquite thorns tore at their clothes, and the sagebrush released its sharp scent as they pushed through it. Neither spoke of the futility of their task. Finding a necklace in acres of tangled wilderness was like searching for a single star in the vast western sky. "It doesn't matter," Victoria finally said, sitting back on her heels, her once fine dress now torn and dusty. "Let it stay lost. It's better than letting them have it." Sawyer studied her in the fading light. Her hair had come loose from its pins, falling around her shoulders in dark waves. The elegant lady who'd stepped off the stagecoach was gone, replaced by someone rawer, more real. "You threw away a fortune," he said quietly. "I threw away my chains." She met his gaze steadily. "That necklace was never really mine. It was a symbol of everything they wanted me to be, a pretty ornament to be displayed, a prize to be won. My mother would have understood." They walked back to the cabin in companionable silence. Over a simple supper of beans and cornbread, which Victoria had finally learned to make without burning, she told him the whole truth. Her mother, Eleanor, had been the daughter of old Southern aristocracy, married into the Pemberton banking empire. After her death, Charles Pemberton had viewed his daughter as another asset to be leveraged for the family's gain. "Harrison Hartford is 30 years my senior," Victoria said, staring into her coffee cup. "He has business interests that align with Father's ambitions for expansion into the railroad territories. Our marriage would have sealed their partnership." "And you'd have no say in it," she laughed bitterly. "Women like me don't get choices. Mr. Briggs, we get obligations. When I refused, Father threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent, to lock me away until I came to my senses. That's when I knew I had to run." "So you answered a stranger's advertisement for a bride?" "It seemed like Providence," she admitted. "A chance to disappear, to become someone else entirely. I thought if I married quickly, under another name, they'd have no legal claim on me. I was naive." Sawyer leaned back in his chair, considering. "Maybe not so naive. You're here. Aren't you free to make your own choices, even if they're hard ones?" "For how long?" The fear crept back into her voice. "Thornton was right. They'll return with marshals, with legal documents. They have money, influence, and we have the truth." Sawyer interrupted. "You took what was yours by rights. You fled an arrangement you never consented to. There are still some judges in this territory who value justice over money." Victoria shook her head. "You don't know my father. He's never lost a fight he wanted to win." "Then maybe it's time he did." The next morning brought an unexpected ally, Samuel Brennan. The town's circuit preacher and part-time legal advocate arrived just after sunrise, a former lawyer who'd found religion after a crisis of conscience. Sam still maintained connections throughout the territory's legal system. "Heard you had some trouble yesterday," Sam said, accepting a cup of coffee. His keen eyes took in Victoria, who sat rigid at the table. 3 city men asking questions in town about a runaway bride." "News travels fast," Sawyer said dryly. "Faster when those men are throwing money around." Sam pulled a folded newspaper from his saddlebag. "This came on yesterday's stage." The St. Louis Daily featured a prominent article about the disappearance of Victoria Pemberton, complete with a photograph that, while formal and stiff, was unmistakably her. The article painted her as unstable, possibly dangerous, definitely in possession of stolen property valued at $20,000. Victoria's hands trembled as she read. "They're saying I attacked Harrison when he tried to calm me. That's a complete fabrication. I never even saw him that night I left during the engagement party, when everyone was distracted." The truth rarely matters when powerful men control the narrative, Sam said gently. "But we might have options. The territorial laws regarding marriage and property are different from those back east. If you were to marry quickly, before any federal warrants arrive, we could make your assumed identity legal. Sawyer finished, understanding. You'd be Iris Briggs, not Victoria Pemberton. It's not that simple, Sam warned. They could still pursue the theft charges, but it would complicate matters considerably. A husband can't be compelled to testify against his wife, and marital property laws here are complex. Victoria looked between the two men. You're suggesting we actually marry now? I'm suggesting, Sam said carefully, that you consider all your options. I can perform the ceremony, file the papers in the territorial capital before anyone knows to look for them. It won't solve everything, but it might buy you time and legal standing. Sawyer found himself holding his breath. When he'd placed that advertisement, he'd imagined a practical arrangement companionship, shared work, perhaps affection growing over time. This was something else entirely, a marriage born of necessity, shadowed by danger. I won't ask that of you, Victoria said quietly, looking at Sawyer. You've already risked too much. When they come back, they'll find my wife, not their runaway. Sawyer interrupted. That is, if you're willing. She searched his face. Why would you do this? You could lose everything, your ranch, your freedom. Maybe because I've spent 5 years building a life that felt empty until you arrived, he admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. Maybe because I believe everyone deserves the right to choose their own path. Or maybe because I'm just stubborn enough to want to see your father's face when he realizes he can't buy everything. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. You hardly know me, the real me. I know enough. Sawyer said simply, I know you're brave enough to throw away a fortune for your freedom, strong enough to blister your hands learning a new life, proud enough to stand tall even when you're scared. That's more than enough to start with. Sam cleared his throat. If we're doing this, we should do it now. I can have the papers filed by nightfall if I ride hard. And so, in the morning light of Sawyer's simple cabin, with no flowers or fancy dress or society witnesses, Victoria Pemberton became Iris Briggs. Sam performed the ceremony with quiet dignity, using Sawyer's mother's simple gold band, the one he'd saved hoping to give it to his bride someday. Do you, Iris Quaid, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Sam asked, using her assumed name carefully. I do, Victoria said, her voice strong and clear. When Sawyer kissed her to seal their union, it was gentle, almost hesitant, two people stepping into unknown territory together. But her hand squeezed his tightly, a promise that whatever came next, they would face it as one. Sam left immediately with a marriage certificate, riding hard for the territorial capital. Alone in the cabin, the newlyweds sat across from each other, the magnitude of what they'd done settling over them. I should check the livestock, Sawyer said eventually, needing movement, needing to think. I'll come with you. Victoria Iris now, he reminded himself, said, already reaching for the work gloves he'd bought her in town. As they walked toward the barn, she stopped suddenly. Sawyer, thank you, not just for this, for everything, for seeing me as more than a commodity to be traded. He touched her face gently, marveling at how natural the gesture felt. You're my wife now. That means we protect each other, come what may. She leaned into his touch for a moment, then straightened with that familiar determined tilt to her chin. Then we'd better prepare. They'll be back, and they'll be angry. Looking out over his land, their land now, Sawyer knew she was right. The storm was coming, bringing with it all the power and fury that money could buy. But as he watched his new wife stride toward the barn, ready to face whatever work the day demanded, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years' hope. They'd thrown the dice on an impossible gamble, a cowboy and an heiress, bound together by desperation and something that might, given time, grow into love. The odds were against them. But then again, Sawyer had built this ranch against the odds, carved a life from unforgiving land through sheer will. Now he had someone to share it with, someone worth fighting for. Let them come with their warrants and their threats. He and Iris would face them together, armed with nothing but truth, determination, and the fragile hope that in this vast Western territory, justice might still mean more than money. The sun climbed higher, warming the desert landscape. Somewhere out in that wilderness lay a fortune in jewels, but here in the simple rhythms of ranch life. Sawyer had found something infinitely more precious, a partner who valued freedom over fortune, courage over comfort. Whatever battles lay ahead, they were no longer alone in fighting them. The night passed in fitful watches. Iris insisted on taking her turn, sitting by the window with Sawyer's rifle across her lap while he tried to sleep. Neither spoke of their strange wedding night, how they'd retired to separate rooms despite their new status, how the marriage that might protect her legally remained unconsummated, a formality born of necessity rather than desire. When dawn broke across the mesas, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold, Iris was making coffee in the kitchen. She'd finally mastered the temperamental stove, and the smell of brewing coffee and frying bacon filled the small cabin. Sawyer watched her from the doorway, noting how she'd adapted his mother's apron to fit her smaller frame, how naturally she moved in what was now her home. "You should have woken me for the last watch," he said. She turned, offering a tired smile. "You needed the rest more than I did. Besides, I couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts chasing each other." Before Sawyer could respond, the sound of approaching horses made them both freeze. Through the window, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon, larger than before, moving with military precision. "Get the ammunition," Sawyer said quietly. "Load both rifles." But as the riders drew closer, he saw the glint of a badge in the morning sun. This wasn't Thornton's hired muscle, this was the law. The man who dismounted in their yard wore the star of a federal marshal. Robert McKenna was known throughout the territory as incorruptible, a man who'd faced down outlaws and cattle barons alike. His weathered face showed neither friendliness nor hostility as he approached the cabin, flanked by 2 deputies. Behind them, Sawyer recognized Thornton and one of his men from the previous day, but it was the final rider who made his jaw clench, a distinguished older man with silver hair and cold eyes that matched Victoria's. Charles Pemberton had come himself in. "Mr. Briggs." Marshal McKenna's voice carried the authority of his office. "I'm here on official business regarding one Victoria Pemberton, who may be residing on your property under false pretenses." Sawyer stepped onto the porch, keeping his hands visible but ready. "No one by that name here. Marshal, don't play games." Pemberton spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the same cultured tones as his daughter's, but none of her warmth. "I know she's here. She was seen in town, identified by multiple witnesses." McKenna raised a hand for silence. "I'll handle this. Mr. Pemberton." He pulled a document from his coat. "I have a warrant for Victoria Pemberton's arrest on charges of grand theft. I'm also informed she may be using the alias Iris Quaid. My wife's name is Iris Briggs," Sawyer said evenly. "We were married yesterday by Samuel Brennan, all legal and proper." Pemberton's face darkened. "Impossible. My daughter cannot marry without my consent. She's under contract to Harrison Hartford." "Your daughter is of legal age," Iris said, stepping out beside Sawyer. Her chin was high, but he could feel her trembling. "Hello, Father." "Victoria." Pemberton's voice could have frozen water. "This charade ends now. You'll return with me immediately." "I'm afraid it's not that simple," McKenna interrupted. "The warrant is for theft, not breach of promise, ma'am. I need to ask you about a necklace valued at $20,000. "The necklace belonged to my mother," Iris said clearly. "It was never my father's to promise to anyone." "The law says otherwise." Thornton interjected. "All property of the household belongs to—" "I have documentation," Iris interrupted, surprising everyone. She disappeared into the cabin and returned with a small leather folder. My mother's will, properly witnessed and notarized. She left her personal jewelry to me explicitly, to be mine upon my majority or marriage, whichever came first. McKenna examined the papers carefully while Pemberton's face grew increasingly red. You had no right to take these documents, he sputtered. They're my legal papers. Iris replied. Mother's lawyer, Mr. Cartwright, provided them to me months ago when I asked. You simply never knew because you never imagined I'd need them. The necklace was in my safe, Pemberton pressed. Taking it without permission is still theft. Where is this necklace now? McKenna asked. Iris met his gaze steadily. Lost. It fell from my possession during my journey here. The wilderness has claimed it. Convenient, Thornton sneered. Marshal, Sawyer spoke up. My wife has shown you legal documentation that the property in question was hers by right. She can't steal what already belongs to her. McKenna nodded slowly. This will change things considerably, Mr. Pemberton. The warrant was issued based on your statement that the necklace was your property, if it belonged to your daughter legally. She's lying, Pemberton said desperately. She's always been unstable, given to fantasies. Ask anyone in St. Louis society. She attacked poor Harrison. I was never even in the same room with Mr. Hartford that night, Iris said calmly. As your guests will attest, if asked honestly, I left during the party. When the announcement was being prepared, I spoke to no one, harmed no one. Ma'am, one of the deputies spoke up. If you don't have the necklace, how can we verify your claims? How can you verify theirs? Sawyer countered. They say she stole it. She says she lost it. Without evidence either way, it's just words. McKenna was studying the will again. This is properly executed. Legal binding. He looked up at Pemberton. Sir, I came here prepared to arrest a thief. What I'm finding is a family dispute over inheritance. That's a civil matter, not criminal. You can't be serious, Thornton protested. We've come all this way. You've made a serious accusation that appears to be false, McKenna said sternly. Making false statements to federal authorities is itself a crime. Mr. Pemberton. Pemberton's composure finally cracked. She's my daughter. She belongs with her family, not with this nobody. She has obligations, a duty to her family's name. I have a duty to myself first, Iris said quietly but firmly. Mother understood that. It's why she made sure I'd have something of my own. Something that couldn't be bartered away for business deals. Mr. Briggs, Mrs. Briggs, McKenna said formally. I apologize for the intrusion. Without evidence of an actual crime, I have no grounds to pursue this matter. He turned to Pemberton. Sir, I suggest you consult with territorial lawyers about any civil claims you might have. But I warn you, the laws here don't favor those who try to control their adult children's choices. This isn't over, Pemberton said, his voice shaking with rage. You think you've won. Victoria, you think this cowboy can give you the life you were born to. You'll come crawling back when you realize what you've thrown away. What I've thrown away, Iris said softly, was a cage. Even if it was made of gold, it was still a cage. Pemberton turned his horse sharply, but paused for one final word. You're dead to me, Victoria. Dead to the family, to society, to everyone who matters. When you tire of playing frontier wife, don't expect forgiveness. I don't, she replied, and Sawyer heard the grief beneath her steady tone. Goodbye, Father. The group rode away, McKenna tipping his hat politely while Pemberton and Thornton retreated in fury. As the dust settled, Iris sagged against Sawyer, the strength that had carried her through the confrontation finally ebbing. You had your mother's will all along, Sawyer said wonderingly. Why didn't you mention it before? I wasn't sure it would be enough, she admitted. Father has bought judges before, but Marshall McKenna, his reputation for honesty gave me hope. So it's over. She shook her head. The legal threat, perhaps, but Father doesn't accept defeat easily. He'll try other methods spreading rumors, ruining your business connections, making life difficult any way he can. Let him try, Sawyer said firmly. I've got no business for him to ruin except what I build with my own hands. And as for rumors, he tilted her chin up gently. I've got the prettiest wife in the territory. Let people talk. Iris laughed, a real laugh this time, though tears stood in her eyes. I've lost my family, my name, everything I was raised to be. No, Sawyer corrected. You found your freedom. The rest, family, name, purpose, we'll build that together. If you're willing. She looked up at him, this man who'd stood between her and her past without hesitation, who'd risked everything for a woman he barely knew. I'm willing, she whispered. As the morning sun climbed higher, they stood together on the porch of their simple home. The threat had passed. For now. But both knew this was only the beginning. Charles Pemberton's parting words hung in the air like a curse, a promise of difficulties to come. But here, in this moment, with the vast western sky stretching endlessly above them and the land sprawling wild and free in every direction, they had what mattered most: choice, the freedom to build a life on their own terms, to write their own story far from the constraining expectations of St. Louis society. Come on, Sawyer said finally, pressing a kiss to her temple. We've got work to do. Ranch won't run itself just because we've had visitors. Iris smiled, wiping away her tears. No, I suppose it won't. She squared her shoulders, ready to face whatever came next. Show me what needs doing, husband. The word sent a warm shiver through both of them, a reminder that what had begun as a desperate deception had become something real, something worth protecting. As they walked toward the barn together, the morning light blessed their path with gold. And the future, uncertain as it was, had never looked brighter. The confrontation with Marshall McKenna had revealed more than just legal documents. As Iris stood before the assembled men, her voice clear and unwavering, she had transformed from a frightened runaway into a woman claiming her rights. The will she produced her mother's final gift of independence had been her secret weapon, carried close to her heart through her desperate flight west. Mother knew, Iris explained to Sawyer later, as they worked side by side mending a section of fence. She knew Father would try to use her jewelry as a business asset. That's why she was so specific in her will. The document had been a masterwork of legal foresight. Eleanor Pemberton had stipulated that her personal jewelry, including the sapphire and diamond necklace, would pass to her daughter free and clear of any claims, liens, or obligations imposed by others, to be hers absolutely upon reaching her majority or upon her marriage, whichever should first occur. Your mother sounds like a wise woman, Sawyer said, hammering a post into the hard ground. She was trapped in her own cage, Iris replied softly. I think she wanted to ensure I'd have at least one key to mine. Marshall McKenna had studied the will with the eye of someone who'd seen too many family disputes turn ugly. The signature of Judge Reginald Cartwright, Eleanor Pemberton's personal attorney and a respected figure in Missouri legal circles, had carried weight even out here in the territories. Mr. Pemberton, McKenna had said, his voice carrying the authority of federal law. This document predates any arrangement you might have made regarding the necklace. Your daughter's rights to her mother's jewelry are clear and established. It was then that Thornton had made his mistake. That will could be forged, he'd suggested desperately. Victoria has always been clever with her hands. Are you making a formal accusation of forgery? McKenna had asked, his tone sharpening. Because that would require investigation, testimony under oath, and if proven false, charges of perjury against the accuser. The threat had hung in the air like a drawn pistol. Pemberton, for all his rage, was too intelligent to risk federal perjury charges on an accusation he knew to be false. He'd seen his daughter's handwriting since childhood. He knew the will was genuine. Furthermore, McKenna had continued, the young lady's claim that she lost the necklace during her travels is entirely plausible. This territory has swallowed fortunes before. Without evidence to the contrary, I must accept her statement. She threw it away. Thornton had burst out, then caught himself, realizing his mistake. McKenna's eyes had narrowed. You saw her do this. We suspect. Suspicion isn't evidence, Mr. Thornton. And even if she had disposed of her own property, that's her right. The legal foundation of their case crumbling. Pemberton had tried one last gambit. She's bound by a marriage contract to Harrison Hartford. She can't simply... In the territories, Mr. Pemberton, a woman of legal age can marry whom she chooses. McKenna had interrupted. Your contracts and arrangements have no standing here unless she consented to them, which clearly she did not. I never signed anything, Iris had added. The negotiations were entirely between Father and Mr. Hartford. I was merely the merchandise being discussed. The marshal's expression had shown clear distaste, like many Western lawmen. He had little patience for Eastern society's treatment of women as chattel. Mrs. Briggs appears to have acted within her rights in every respect. She took property legally hers, left a situation she found intolerable, and entered into a legal marriage of her own free will. This is preposterous, Pemberton had sputtered. I'll take this to the territorial governor, to Washington if necessary. That's your privilege, McKenna had said calmly. But I'd advise you to consider carefully, making false accusations to federal authorities, attempting to use the law to retrieve a daughter who is legally married. These actions could have consequences for your own standing. It was then that Pemberton had turned his fury on his daughter directly. You've destroyed everything our family's reputation, the Hartford alliance, years of planning. I destroyed nothing, Iris had replied with quiet dignity. I simply refuse to be currency in your transactions. If your plans required my enslavement, then they deserved to fail. The marshal had begun to look impatient. Gentlemen, I've ridden 2 days on the basis of what now appears to be a false complaint. My time has been wasted, government resources expended. Be grateful I'm not filing charges for making false statements to federal authorities. Marshal McKenna, Sawyer had spoken up. My wife and I appreciate your diligence in investigating this matter thoroughly. We have no wish to press charges against anyone. We simply want to be left in peace to build our life together. McKenna had nodded approvingly. Spoken like a man who understands the law's true purpose, justice, not vengeance. He'd turned back to Pemberton. Sir, your daughter has made her choice. The law supports it. I strongly advise you to accept it and return to St. Louis. Never, Pemberton had hissed. She's made her choice. As you say, let her live with the consequences. When drought comes, when cattle die, when this shabby ranch fails, and it will fail, she'll realize what she's given up. Don't come begging to me then. Victoria, as far as I'm concerned, I have no daughter. Then we understand each other perfectly, Iris had replied, though Sawyer had seen the pain flash across her face. I wish you safe travels. Mr. Pemberton. The dismissal in her tone, addressing him formally rather than as father, had been the final blow. Pemberton had wheeled his horse around, Thornton following, but not before the latter had given them both a look that promised this wasn't over. McKenna had lingered a moment after the others left. Ma'am, Mr. Briggs, a word of warning. Men like Pemberton don't forget what they see as betrayal. He'll likely try other means: financial pressure, social warfare, perhaps hired troublemakers. Stay vigilant. We will, Marshal, Sawyer had assured him, and thank you for seeing the truth of the matter. The truth was clear enough once all the facts were laid out. McKenna had replied. He'd tipped his hat to Iris. Your mother must have been a remarkable woman to raise a daughter with such courage. Her legacy lives on in more than just jewelry. After the marshal and his deputies had departed, the ranch had seemed almost unnaturally quiet. The confrontation they dreaded had come and gone, leaving them legally vindicated but emotionally drained. "He meant it," Iris had said quietly, staring at the dust cloud marking her father's retreat. "About having no daughter. He's cut me off completely." "His loss," Sawyer had said firmly, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Any man who'd trade his daughter's happiness for a business deal doesn't deserve her." Now. Hours later, as they worked together in the afternoon sun, Sawyer could see Iris processing all that had happened. The fear that had haunted her eyes for days was gone, replaced by a mixture of sadness and relief. "Do you regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Losing your family, your position, everything you've known." Iris paused in her work, considering. "I regret that it had to happen this way. I regret that my father values wealth over love, control over family, but regret my choice." She shook her head. "Never. For the first time in my life, I'm free to be myself, not some ornamental version crafted to please others." "And who is that, the real you?" She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "I'm still discovering that, but I know she's someone who can learn to shoot a rifle, tend a garden, mend a fence, someone who chooses her own path, even when it's difficult." She met his eyes. "Someone who might, given time, make a good rancher's wife." "You're already that," Sawyer said softly. "And more." They returned to their work, but the air between them had shifted. The marriage that had begun as a desperate convenience was becoming something deeper. In standing together against her father's power, they'd forged a partnership that went beyond legal documents. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Sawyer found himself thinking about the necklace still hidden somewhere in the wilderness. $20,000 in gems, swallowed by the unforgiving landscape. But watching Iris work beside him, her delicate hands now sporting calluses, her fancy dress replaced by practical cotton, her face glowing with purpose rather than powder, he knew she'd been right to throw it away. Some prices were too high to pay, and some freedoms too precious to sell. Charles Pemberton might never understand that, but here in the vast openness of the Western Territories, his daughter had found her truth, and Sawyer, who'd thought he was getting a simple farm wife, had instead gained a partner whose courage matched the wild beauty of the land itself. The storm had passed. For now. But, as McKenna had warned, men like Pemberton didn't forget. Whatever came next, though, Sawyer knew they'd face it as they had today together, with truth as their weapon and freedom as their cause. The days following her father's departure settled into a rhythm both foreign and comforting to Iris. Each morning, she rose before dawn with Sawyer, her hands slowly learning the dozens of tasks that kept the ranch running. The blisters from her first week had hardened into calluses, and her movements around the kitchen grew more confident, less like a visitor and more like someone who belonged. "You're holding the dough too tight." Mrs. Muller, their nearest neighbor, instructed during one of her visits. The older woman had taken it upon herself to teach Iris the domestic skills her privileged upbringing had omitted. "Bread needs a gentle touch, like a baby." Iris adjusted her grip, kneading the dough with growing confidence. Through the window, she could see Sawyer working with the horses, his movements sure and practiced. Sometimes she still marveled at the strangeness of it all, Victoria Pemberton, who had once worn silk gloves to afternoon teas, now up to her elbows in flour, learning to make bread from scratch. "He's a good man, your Sawyer," Mrs. Muller observed, following her gaze. "Not many would have stood up to powerful men like that. My Heinrich heard all about it in town." The story had spread quickly through their small community. Opinions were divided. Some admired Sawyer for protecting his bride, while others whispered about the scandal of harboring a runaway heiress. Iris had felt the weight of their stares during her first trip to Cedar Ridge for supplies. "Let them look," Sawyer had said quietly, helping her down from the wagon. "We've got nothing to be ashamed of." But shame wasn't what Iris felt. It was more complex, a mixture of pride in her choice and grief for what she'd lost. At night, she sometimes dreamed of her mother, of the house in St. Louis with its crystal chandeliers and marble floors. She'd wake to find herself in the simple cabin, moonlight streaming through cotton curtains instead of silk, and feel both loss and relief in equal measure. The garden became her particular project. The small plot behind the cabin had been neglected, but Iris threw herself into reviving it with the same determination she brought to every new challenge. She read the almanac Sawyer had bought her, studied the soil, learned which plants could survive the harsh climate. "Tomatoes won't last out here without shade," Jake Morrison, another neighbor, advised when he stopped by to trade horses with Sawyer. "But squash, beans, peppers, those'll do fine if you water them right." Iris took notes in a small journal, her elegant handwriting gradually becoming more practical, less ornamental. Everything about her was adapting, evolving to fit this new life. Even her appearance had changed. Her pale skin now carried a hint of sun, her hair more often in a simple braid than an elaborate style. But it was the internal changes that surprised her most. The constant anxiety that had plagued her in St. Louis, the fear of saying the wrong thing, wearing the wrong dress, disappointing the wrong person had faded. In its place grew a different kind of awareness, one tied to weather and seasons, to the health of livestock and the state of the garden. "You're different," Sawyer told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "More yourself, I think." "I didn't know who that was before," Iris admitted. "In St. Louis, I was always performing the dutiful daughter, the perfect society lady, the valuable bride. Here, I'm just Iris." "That's enough," Sawyer said simply, "more than enough." Their relationship, too, was evolving. The formal distance of their first days had given way to an easier companionship. They worked side by side during the day, shared meals and conversation in the evening. Though they still kept separate bedrooms, their marriage remained one of convenience rather than consummation. There was a growing warmth between them, moments when their hands would touch and linger, when their eyes would meet and hold. The test came 3 weeks after her father's visit. Iris was alone at the ranch, Sawyer having ridden to town for supplies. When a lone rider approached, her hand went immediately to the rifle by the door. But she relaxed when she recognized Sam Brennan, the preacher who had married them. "Mrs. Briggs," he greeted her, but his usually cheerful face was serious. "I'm afraid I have some concerning news." Iris invited him in, serving coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "What's happened?" "I've been receiving inquiries," Sam said carefully. "Letters from lawyers in St. Louis, questioning the validity of your marriage. They're suggesting I performed the ceremony under false pretenses, that you used a false name." "Iris Quaid was the name I chose for myself," she said firmly. "There was no deception in my intent to marry Sawyer." "I know that, and you know that, but lawyers have a way of twisting truth into knots." Sam pulled out a letter. "They're also spreading rumors back east. I have a cousin in Missouri who sent me a newspaper article suggesting you're being held against your will, that Sawyer is some kind of outlaw who's corrupted you." Iris read the article, her jaw tightening. It painted her as a victim of a rough frontier predator who had taken advantage of her fragile mental state following her breakdown at the engagement party. Sawyer was described in terms that made him sound barely civilized. "They can't accept that I chose this," she said, setting the paper aside. "That I might prefer an honest man who works with his hands to their gilded cage. Your father has also been making inquiries about Sawyer's finances," Sam continued reluctantly. "Looking for debts to buy, liens to exploit. He's trying to force you back by destroying what you've chosen." Iris felt a cold anger rise in her chest. "He said I was dead to him." A wounded man often says things he doesn't mean. Or perhaps he means to bury what you've built here before he buries the memory of you. When Sawyer returned that afternoon, he found Iris in the garden, attacking weeds with unusual vehemence. He listened quietly as she explained Sam's visit, his face darkening with each detail. "So he's going to try to ruin us," Sawyer said when she finished. "I won't let him," Iris said fiercely. "This is my home now, our home. I won't let him take it away." Sawyer studied her, this woman who had arrived in silk and fear, who now stood in patched cotton with dirt under her nails and fire in her eyes. "What do you want to do?" "Fight," she said simply. "But not on his terms. He expects me to crumble, to come crawling back. Instead, we'll build something here he can't touch." Over the following days, they developed their strategy. Sawyer had always been cautious with money, had no debts for Pemberton to exploit. The ranch was small but unencumbered, built through years of careful saving and hard work. "We'll need to be more self-sufficient," Sawyer said, going over their plans. "Less dependent on town credit, in case your father tries to influence the merchants." "I can help with that," Iris said. "The garden can provide more of our food. I've been learning to preserve vegetables from Mrs. Muller, and—" She hesitated, then continued. "I still have some jewelry, nothing as valuable as the necklace, but enough to give us a cushion if needed." "Your mother's things?" "A few pieces Father didn't know about, hidden, sewn into my corset." She smiled wryly. "Even then, I was planning for contingencies." They were interrupted by approaching horses, several of them. Iris reached for the rifle, but Sawyer placed a calming hand on her arm. "That's Tom Walker's bay mare in front. He's the territorial assessor." The group that dismounted was official but not threatening. Tom Walker, a thin man with honest eyes, approached with papers in hand. "Sawyer, Mrs. Briggs, I'm sorry to disturb you, but I've received a formal request to reassess your property." "Let me guess the source," Sawyer said dryly. "The request came through proper channels," Tom said diplomatically. "But yes, it originated from St. Louis. Someone seems very interested in the exact value and status of your holdings." "Do what you need to do," Sawyer said. "We've got nothing to hide." As Tom and his assistants went about their business, measuring and noting, Iris served them water and answered their questions with calm precision. She'd learned enough about the ranch's operations to speak knowledgeably about their assets, the cattle, horses, water rights, and improvements Sawyer had made over the years. "You've done well here," Tom told Sawyer when he finished. "Small but solid. Good water access, healthy stock. The improvements are clear fencing, buildings, the irrigation system you've started." "Will that satisfy whoever's asking?" Iris inquired. Tom hesitated. "They were particularly interested in liens or encumbrances. I'll have to report there are none. This ranch is free and clear." After they left, Iris and Sawyer stood together in the gathering dusk. "He's looking for leverage," Iris said. "Some way to force us into a position where I'd have to return." "He won't find it," Sawyer said firmly. "I've lived careful all my life. Never borrowed what I couldn't repay, never promised what I couldn't deliver." "Unlike my father," Iris said softly, "who built an empire on borrowed money and broken promises." That night, as they sat by the fire, Iris made a decision. "I want to write to my mother's sister. Aunt Catherine never approved of Father's methods. She might be willing to help us understand what he's planning. Would she respond?" "She loved my mother, and she never forgave Father for trying to sell me like cattle." Iris smiled grimly. "If anyone in St. Louis society would help us, it would be her," as she penned the letter, choosing her words carefully. Sawyer watched her with growing admiration. This woman who had fled in desperation was becoming a strategist, meeting each challenge with intelligence and determination. The hands that had once held only fans and dance cards now held tools and weapons. but the mind behind those violet eyes remained sharp as ever. The frontier was teaching her its lessons: self-reliance, resilience, the value of hard work. But she was teaching him something too, that courage came in many forms, that choosing freedom over comfort was its own kind of strength, and that sometimes the most powerful act of rebellion was simply refusing to be what others expected. Whatever Charles Pemberton's next move, they would be ready. Not with the wealth and connections of St. Louis society, but with something more valuable: the unbreakable will of two people who had chosen each other and the life they were building, one day at a time, under the vast western sky. The drought arrived like an unwelcome visitor, settling over the land with oppressive certainty. For 3 weeks, not a drop of rain had fallen. The grass turned brittle beneath the relentless sun, and the creek that fed Sawyer's water tank slowed to a trickle. Each morning, Iris woke to cloudless skies that had once seemed beautiful but now felt threatening. "We'll need to move the cattle to the north pasture," Sawyer said over breakfast, his face etched with worry lines she hadn't seen before. "Still some water in the old reservoir there, but it won't last long if this keeps up." Iris had learned to read the signs of drought: the way the horses grew listless, how the chickens panted in whatever shade they could find, the dust that settled on everything despite her constant cleaning. But she'd also learned that despair was a luxury they couldn't afford. "I'll help drive them," she said, already reaching for her work clothes. The riding skirts she'd fashioned from her old dresses were a far cry from her St. Louis finery, but they served their purpose. "It's hard work in this heat," Sawyer warned. "So is everything else." She met his eyes steadily. "We do this together. Remember?" They spent the morning moving cattle, Iris on the mare Sawyer had gentled for her, learning to anticipate the animals' movements, to guide them without panic. The sun beat down mercilessly, and dust rose in choking clouds, but she kept pace with Sawyer, earning an approving nod that meant more than any society compliment ever had. It was late afternoon when they saw the rider approaching. Iris tensed, but relaxed when she recognized their neighbor, Bill Harper, whose ranch bordered theirs to the east. "Sawyer, Mrs. Briggs." Bill touched his hat, but his usual friendly demeanor was strained. "I'm afraid I've got some troubling news. Thought you should hear it from a neighbor rather than discover it on your own." "What's happened?" Sawyer asked, though Iris could see he was bracing for the answer. "There's talk in town. Someone's been offering to buy up water rights, specifically targeting the smaller ranchers. Good money. 2 more than fair market value." Bill shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "The offer comes with conditions, though they're particularly interested in any rights adjacent to your property." Iris felt her stomach clench. "My father?" Bill nodded reluctantly. "The money man claims to represent Eastern interests, but folks are putting pieces together. 3 families have already sold. The drought's got them scared. And the money," he shrugged helplessly. "Times are hard. He's trying to control our water access," Sawyer said grimly. "Box us in until we have no choice but to sell or watch the stock die." "That's not the worst of it," Bill continued. "There's been talk of a new territorial water commission, funded by concerned investors who want to properly manage water distribution. If it goes through, they'll have legal authority to redirect water based on greatest economic benefit." After Bill left, Iris and Sawyer stood in the dusty yard, the weight of this new threat settling over them like the heat itself. "He's using the drought as a weapon," Iris said bitterly, "creating a crisis he can solve for a price." "We won't sell," Sawyer said firmly. "I've weathered droughts before. Not with Charles Pemberton engineering them." Iris wiped sweat from her brow, thinking furiously. "But 2 can play at water politics. I need to write more letters." That evening, while Sawyer tended the horses, Iris penned careful correspondence to her Aunt Catherine and to Eleanor's old attorney, Judge Cartwright. She also wrote to Sam Brennan, asking him to use his connections to learn more about this proposed water commission. The responses came quicker than expected. Catherine's letter, delivered by special courier, was both warming and alarming. My dear niece, your father has indeed been busy. He's calling in favors across the territory, painting himself as a concerned investor, trying to bring civilization to the frontier. The Water Commission is his brainchild, though he's keeping his name carefully distanced from it. But you should know you have allies. Your mother's friends remember her fondly. And not all of St. Louis society approves of Charles's methods. I'm enclosing a bank draft, not charity, but your inheritance from your grandmother that your father conveniently forgot to mention. Use it wisely. More importantly, I'm sending copies of certain documents that might interest the territorial governor, proof of your father's past schemes that ended badly for small investors. Sometimes the best defense is showing a pattern of behavior. Stand strong, dear one. Your mother would be proud. Aunt Catherine. The bank draft was substantial, not a fortune, but enough to help them weather the drought without desperation. More valuable were the document's newspaper clippings, court records, testimony from your father's previous investment opportunities that had enriched him while ruining others. Your aunt is a formidable woman, Sawyer said after reading the materials. Mother always said Catherine should have been born a man. She had the head for business. Father pretended only men possessed. Iris smiled grimly. Now we use his own methods against him. The next weeks were a blur of activity. While Sawyer and the hired hands, the two young men grateful for work during hard times, focused on keeping the cattle alive with their dwindling water supplies. Iris waged her own campaign. She visited neighboring ranches, sharing what she'd learned about the Water Commission, showing the documents Catherine had sent. Mrs. Briggs is right. Tom Muller, the assessor, told a gathering at the church after Sunday services. I've seen this before in other territories. Outside investors come in during hard times, buy up resources cheap, then sell them back at 10 times the price. Not everyone was convinced. The drought deepened, and the offers for water rights grew more generous. Some families, watching their cattle suffer, couldn't resist the immediate relief the money would provide. I don't blame them, Sawyer said one evening, after learning the Hendersons had sold. Man's got to feed his family, which is exactly what Father counts on. Iris replied. She was thinner now, the hard work and constant worry taking their toll, but her resolve hadn't wavered. He's always understood desperation better than hope. The crisis deepened when their main well showed signs of failing. Sawyer and Iris worked together through the night, deepening it by hand, taking turns with pick and shovel while the other hauled up buckets of dirt. By dawn, they'd reached water again, but both knew it was a temporary solution. We can't keep this up forever, Sawyer said, exhaustion clear in his voice. We won't have to. Iris promised. Sam sent word the territorial governor is asking questions about the Water Commission. Apparently, some prominent citizens in the capital received copies of Father's past schemes, anonymously. Of course, your aunt, and Judge Cartwright, and several of Mother's old friends who remember what Charles Pemberton did to their husbands' businesses. Iris managed a tired smile. He taught me well always have allies in reserve. The next test came from an unexpected source. Harrison Hartford himself arrived one scorching afternoon, his fancy carriage absurdly out of place on the dusty ranch road. He was older than Iris had remembered, his face already showing the dissipation of too much whiskey and too little purpose. Victoria, he said, climbing down with obvious distaste for his surroundings. I've come to make you a final offer. Mrs. Briggs, Iris corrected coolly. And anything you have to say can be said in front of my husband. Hartford's gaze dismissed Sawyer as beneath notice. Your father is prepared to be generous. Return with me. And all this, he gestured at the drought-stricken landscape, unpleasantness ends. Your cowboy keeps his ranch. With guaranteed water rights, you return to civilization where you belong. As your wife, Iris asked. The engagement was never formally broken. Society understands youthful rebellion. We'll say you needed time to adjust to the idea of marriage. Sawyer stepped forward, but Iris placed a hand on his arm. "Mr. Hartford," she said clearly, "I would rather watch this ranch turn to dust, rather die of thirst in this drought, than spend one day as your wife. I chose freedom over comfort, love over arrangement. That will never change." Hartford's face reddened. "Love with this nobody you threw away everything for a romantic delusion." "I threw away nothing of value," Iris replied, "and gained everything that matters. Please leave, now." As Hartford's carriage retreated, Sawyer pulled Iris close. "Love?" he asked softly. She looked up at him, this man who'd stood by her through every trial, who'd never asked her to be anything but herself. "Yes," she said simply. "Love." That night, as if in answer to their stand, clouds began gathering on the horizon. By morning, the first drops of rain were falling, not enough to end the drought, but enough to bring hope. "It's not over," Iris said, standing on the porch as the rain gathered strength. "Father won't give up easily." "Neither will we," Sawyer replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "We've made it this far. Whatever comes next, we'll handle it." The rain fell harder, turning the dusty yard to mud, filling the water tanks, bringing the land back to life. And in that simple cabin, two people who'd found each other across impossible odds held tight to their choice, their love, and their determination to build a life that no amount of money or manipulation could destroy. The drought would end, as droughts always did. But what they'd forged in its crucible partnership, trust, and a love that chose struggle over surrender, would endure whatever storms lay ahead. The storm arrived with a violence that matched the emotional tempest of the past months. Lightning split the sky as rain hammered against the cabin walls, turning the dry arroyos into raging torrents. Iris and Sawyer stood on the covered porch, watching nature's fury transform the landscape that had thirsted for so long. "It's beautiful," Iris said, extending her hand to catch the rain. "Terrifying, but beautiful." "Like everything worth having in this life," Sawyer replied, pulling her closer as thunder rolled across the valley. They had survived the drought, though barely. The rain that had begun as a blessing had continued intermittently for a week, enough to refill their water tanks and revive the pastures. But with the storm came other challenges, flooding that threatened to wash out their newly planted gardens, lightning that spooked the cattle into dangerous stampedes. In the midst of the storm's second night, a rider appeared, Sam Brennan, soaked through and urgent. "The bridge at Cedar Creek is about to go," he reported, accepting the coffee Iris pressed into his hands. "But that's not why I'm here. There's news from the territorial capital. The Water Commission proposal has been rejected. The governor received enough evidence of irregular dealings that he's ordered an investigation instead." "Father won't accept that quietly," Iris said. "No," Sam agreed. "Which is why you should also know Charles Pemberton himself is on his way here. Left Denver 2 days ago with a small army of lawyers and hired men." Sawyer and Iris exchanged glances. After all the proxies and schemes, her father was coming himself. "Let him come," Sawyer said firmly. "This is our land, our life. He has no power here except what we give him." But Iris knew better. "He's not coming to negotiate. He's coming to see his final move played out." She turned to Sam. "Thank you for the warning. You'd better stay here tonight. It's too dangerous to ride back in this storm." The next morning dawned clear and fresh, the storm having washed the world clean. Iris stood in her garden, salvaging what she could from the flood damage, when she heard the horses, many horses. Charles Pemberton rode at the head of a group of 8 men lawyers by the look of some, hired guns by the look of others. He sat his horse like a man who owned everything he surveyed, though Iris noticed he'd aged in the months since she'd fled. His face was gaunter, his eyes harder. "Victoria," he said, not dismounting, "you've led me quite a chase." "I've led my own life," she replied, standing straight despite the mud on her dress and dirt under her nails. Something you never wanted me to do. Sawyer emerged from the barn, rifle in hand but pointed down. Their 2 hired hands flanked him, loyal despite the impressive show of force. Mr. Pemberton, Sawyer said evenly, state your business. My business is with my daughter. Pemberton's voice carried the authority of decades of command. Though I suppose I should thank you. Mr. Briggs, you've taught her to be almost as stubborn as I am. She didn't need teaching in that, Sawyer replied, just the freedom to show it. Pemberton finally dismounted, his expensive boots immediately sinking into the mud. I've come with a final proposition. Not as your father, Victoria, but as a businessman. You've cost me considerably the Hartford Alliance, social standing, business opportunities. By my accounting, you owe me approximately $50,000 in damages. I owe you nothing, Iris said coldly. Perhaps not, but your husband's ranch is worth perhaps 1/10 of that. I'm prepared to forgive the debt in exchange for the deed. You can leave together, start fresh somewhere else, free of any further interference from me. You want us to give up our home? Sawyer's voice was dangerously quiet. I want my daughter to understand consequences. Pemberton replied. She made her choice. Now she can live with it elsewhere. It was then that Iris laughed, not the bitter laugh of their previous encounters, but something genuine and free. Oh, Father, you still don't understand, do you? This isn't about money or land or even defiance. It's about love, something you've never valued because it can't be bought or sold or leveraged. She walked forward until she stood directly before him, close enough to see the lines that power and loneliness had carved into his face. I loved you once, desperately wanted your approval, your affection, but you only saw me as an asset, a tool for your ambitions. I gave you everything, Pemberton said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. You gave me things, Iris corrected. Mother gave me love, and when she died, she made sure I'd have the means to find it again. She gestured to the simple ranch, to Sawyer standing protective and strong. This is what love built, not much by your standards, but worth more than all your banks and railroads because it was chosen, not arranged. Pretty words, Pemberton said, but something in his eyes flickered. They won't pay your bills or protect you from the world's harsh realities. No, Iris agreed, but they'll sustain us through droughts and storms, through schemes and threats. Can you say the same about your empire? Father, when you're alone in your mansion, counting your profits, what sustains you? For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Pemberton straightened, the businessman's mask sliding back into place. You've made your position clear, as have I. He turned to his lawyers. Proceed with the foreclosure paperwork on the surrounding properties we've acquired. If they won't sell, we'll make ranching here difficult. Actually, a new voice interrupted. I don't think you will. Everyone turned to see a group of riders approaching Marshal McKenna at the lead. But behind him rode someone unexpected, Judge Reginald Cartwright, Iris's mother's old attorney, accompanied by what appeared to be territorial officials. Judge Cartwright. Pemberton's composure cracked slightly. Charles, the judge said, dismounting despite his advanced years. When young Iris wrote to me about your activities here, I felt it my duty to investigate, particularly when I discovered you'd been using Eleanor's name and memory to establish credibility with your water scheme. That's a lie? I have documents, Cartwright interrupted calmly, including letters where you claim Eleanor would have wanted to bring prosperity to the frontier, using your dead wife's name for a scheme she would have despised. That's low, even for you. Marshal McKenna stepped forward. Mr. Pemberton, I'm here to inform you that the territorial governor has issued an injunction against your water rights purchases, pending investigation of fraudulent claims and market manipulation. You're free to leave the territory, but your business here is finished. Pemberton's face had gone pale. then read, "This is orchestrated persecution. I'll have every one of you in federal court." "You're welcome to try," Judge Cartwright said mildly. "But I should mention Eleanor left more than jewelry to her daughter. She left letters. Charles, letters detailing your business practices, your treatment of her, your plans for Victoria. I've kept them sealed out of respect for the family. But if you persist in harassing these good people—" The threat hung in the air like lightning before thunder. Pemberton looked around at his lawyers, who suddenly seemed less confident, at the territorial officials who regarded him with open suspicion, at the marshal whose hand rested casually on his sidearm. Finally, his gaze returned to Iris. "You're just like her," he said quietly. "Eleanor. Same stubborn pride, same romantic foolishness. It killed her, you know, the disappointment of what life really was versus what she dreamed." "No," Iris said softly but firmly. "What killed her was being trapped in a loveless marriage, watching her daughter being groomed for the same fate. But she made sure I'd have choices she didn't, and I've chosen." Pemberton stood for a long moment, looking older and more alone than Iris had ever seen him. Then, without another word, he mounted his horse and rode away, his entourage scrambling to follow. As the dust settled, Judge Cartwright approached Iris. "Your mother would be so proud of you, my dear. She always said you had more spine than your father credited." "Thank you," Iris said, tears flowing freely now. "For everything." "I'm only sorry it took me so long to act, but then, you seem to be handling matters quite capably on your own." He smiled at Sawyer. "You've chosen well, both of you." After the officials left and life returned to something approaching normal, Iris and Sawyer stood together in their rain-washed garden. The plants that had survived the storm were already reaching for the sun, stronger for having weathered the tempest. "So it's over?" Sawyer asked. "That part is," Iris agreed. "Father won't be back. His pride won't let him, not after such a public defeat." She leaned into his strength. "But our story, that's just beginning." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold, Iris felt a peace she'd never known in her previous life. The ranch was modest, the work was hard, and challenges would always come with the seasons. But she was free to love, to choose, to build a life of meaning rather than mere wealth. "I have something to tell you," she said suddenly, "about the necklace." Sawyer raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I didn't throw it as far as everyone thinks. It's hidden, buried beneath that old cottonwood by the creek. I thought, maybe someday, if we truly needed it, or if we had a daughter who deserved her grandmother's legacy." Sawyer pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You're full of surprises, Mrs. Briggs." "I learned from the best," she replied. "Mother always said a woman should have her own resources, her own choices." "And what do you choose now?" Iris looked out over their land, their hard-won, storm-tested, beloved land. Then she looked at the man beside her, who'd stood with her against all odds, who'd seen her not as a prize or possession, but as a partner and equal. "I choose this," she said simply. "Every day, in every way, I choose this." As darkness fell over the western frontier, bringing with it the promise of cool relief and peaceful sleep, two souls who'd found each other across impossible odds held tight to their hard-won happiness. The storms had passed. The threats had failed. And love, that most precious and uncommodifiable of treasures, had won its quiet victory. In the vast tapestry of the American West, their story was just one thread among many, but it was theirs, woven with courage and choice, struggle and triumph, and a love that had proved stronger than all the forces arrayed against it. And in the simple shelter of their frontier home, that was more than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and let me know what you thought of Sawyer and Iris's journey. Your thoughts and feelings about their story mean the world to me.